I was 12 the first time I stopped believing that adults were always right. You grow up thinking your parents know what they're doing, that every decision they make is backed by something pure, love, logic, maybe a plan. But that illusion cracked like glass when I found out my dad had been cheating on my mom. By the time they divorced, the truth wasn't even a secret anymore. Everyone knew, but no one looked at me long enough to ask how I was handling it. I guess they thought kids bounce back like rubber bands. I didn't bounce. I snapped. My dad had already moved in with her, his affair partner. Even the word felt heavy in my mouth, like something sour. The first time I stayed over, it felt like stepping into a counterfeit version of my old life. Everything looked normal on the surface. A house, furniture, two adults making dinner, but the air felt wrong. It smelled like betrayal disguised as air freshener. I sat in the living room pretending to read while they whispered in the kitchen. When they left the room, they left their phones behind. It wasn't planned. There wasn't some grand scheme in my head, no cinematic music swelling as I plotted revenge. It was just their two unlocked screens glowing beside me, buzzing with new messages. I picked up my dad's phone. His contacts were all labeled with first names, except a few. Mom, work, boss. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was seeing that he still had mom in his phone, my mom, as if she were still part of this version of his life. Maybe it was the fact that I'd watched my mom cry for months, and everyone kept telling me to be mature about it. So I did the most mature thing 12-year-old me could think of. I opened their work contacts and texted their bosses, both of them. I told the truth, but I didn't hold back. He's been sleeping with her for months while still married. They live together now. Thought you should know what kind of people you employ. I hit send and stared at the screen. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might rattle my ribs apart. Then I set the phones back exactly how they'd been, sat down, and waited for the world to tilt. When she found out, it wasn't a scream at first, more like a gasp that turned into a storm. She came charging into the room, eyes wild, face red, shouting words she probably thought would scare me. They didn't. She called me things no adult should ever call a child, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I wanted her to know I wasn't afraid of her. When my dad walked in, his face was pale. He wasn't yelling, not yet. He just looked tired, like someone who couldn't believe consequences had shown up at his front door wearing his daughter's face. "Why would you do that?" he asked me, like I'd just broken a vase instead of breaking the illusion that he was a decent man. I looked right at him and said, "Actions have consequences." I reminded him that those were his own words, the same phrase he used when I was grounded, when I failed a test, when I forgot to call. He blinked, like the sentence hit him harder than he expected. But instead of apologizing, he just sighed and told me I didn't understand how adult relationships worked. I didn't need to. I understood right and wrong, and that was enough. It became a family scandal that refused to die. For over a year, it hung over everything, birthdays, holidays, every polite conversation that turned sour the moment someone mentioned my name. I refused to apologize, no matter how many times they brought it up. Eventually, they stopped letting me come over. They said it was too hard to be around me. What they meant was that I reminded them of who they really were. At first, I felt powerful, like I'd done something that mattered. But as time went on, that feeling twisted. I missed my dad, or maybe I missed the version of him that existed before I knew what he was capable of. But every time I thought about forgiving him, I remembered how easily he'd moved on, how quickly he'd rewritten the story so that he was the victim. 4 years passed before I saw him again. I was 16, taller, sharper, and a little more tired. My grandparents invited me to dinner, a family reunion, they said, as if putting us all in the same room could undo anything. When I walked in, he was there, and so was she. My stomach turned, but I sat down anyway, out of respect for my grandparents if nothing else. Dinner was awkward but calm, for a while. Then she brought it up. "You know," she started, in that voice people use when they're pretending to be calm, "you really ruined our reputations. We've never recovered from that." I froze mid-bite. Everyone else at the table went still. She went on. "You could have cost us everything. You were a child, but what you did was cruel. You owe us an apology." I felt something rise in my chest, not anger, not pride, just that same old ache that never really went away. I set my fork down and said, "You don't want me to answer that." She frowned. "Excuse me. I mean it," I said. "You really don't want to know what I think you deserve." Her face went red. My dad tried to step in, but she was already yelling again, saying I was ungrateful, vindictive, heartless. I ignored her. My grandparents told her to quiet down, but she wouldn't stop. She demanded another apology, louder this time, until my grandfather finally said, "That's enough. You two should leave." They left. The room went silent except for the clinking of silverware. My grandmother sighed and whispered that she regretted inviting them. I just nodded. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Later, my uncles found the whole thing hilarious. One of them even told me that my dad and his wife had cheated on each other multiple times since then. "They're both miserable," he said with a grin. I laughed too, not because it was funny, but because it felt like the universe had finally evened the score. But then one of my aunts, always the peacekeeper, pulled me aside. "You should have just apologized," she said. "For the sake of the moment, for your grandparents. You were a kid, yes, but what you did was too much. Too much." That phrase stuck in my head all night. I lay awake wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe sending those messages had been too much for a 12-year-old. But every time I tried to imagine saying I'm sorry, the words turned to ash. Because I wasn't sorry. Not for what I did. Maybe for how much it still defined me, but not for doing it. I told myself I'd let it go after that dinner. But I didn't know then that the past has a way of circling back. Quieter, meaner, disguised as closure. And mine was just about to knock on my door. The next weekend, my dad showed up at my door. No warning, no text, just a knock that made my stomach twist. It had been months since that dinner, but seeing him standing there was like being 12 again. He looked older, not just older in years, but in the way people do, when their mistakes have started living in their faces. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice careful, the kind of careful that usually meant he wanted something. I stepped aside, hesitating just long enough to remind him that I didn't owe him this. He walked in, scanned my apartment like it was a test of how well I'd turned out despite him. He started with small talk, the weather, work, the traffic. I waited, silent, until he ran out of polite words and had to reach for real ones. "About the dinner," he said finally. "You could have handled it better." I stared at him. That was it. No acknowledgement, no apology for how his wife had humiliated me in front of our grandparents. Just "you could have handled it better." I folded my arms. "You drove 4 hours to tell me that." He sighed. "You know that night wasn't easy for anyone. She's still hurt by what happened years ago." I let out a bitter laugh. "You mean the part where I told the truth?" He flinched. "You were a child." "I still am, apparently," I said. "Because you keep talking to me like I don't understand what you did." His voice hardened. "You humiliated us, both of us. You don't get to decide who pays for what mistake." That made something in me snap. "I didn't decide anything," I said, my voice shaking. "You decided, you cheated, you lied, you left Mom. I just told the world what you were already doing." He ran a hand over his face, looking more exhausted than angry now. "You think this is black and white, but life isn't that simple. Your mother and I." "Don't," I said. "Don't say your mother and I. You don't get to group her into this like she was part of the same story. She was the one you betrayed." He didn't speak. He just sat down on the couch like he needed the furniture to keep him from collapsing. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Do you ever regret it?" I thought about that day, the 2 glowing screens, the messages, the look on her face when she realized I'd done it. I thought about how I'd felt afterward, small but finally heard. Then I thought about all the years of silence that followed. "No," I said. "I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret doing it." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that answer. Then his tone changed, softer, almost vulnerable. "You know, your grandmother called me that night after dinner. She said she was proud of you, said you finally spoke up." That caught me off guard. "She said that?" He nodded. "She also told me I raised you too well, that you got your sense of justice from me." He gave a bitter smile. "Ironic, huh?" I didn't know what to say. He looked around the apartment again. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly. "Better than I did at your age." I shrugged. "That's not a high bar." He actually smiled at that. A real one, small but human. For a moment, we sat in something that almost resembled peace. Then, as always, he ruined it. "Melinda thinks it would mean a lot to everyone if you apologized," he said. There it was, the real reason he'd come. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Of course she does. She says she can't move on otherwise," he continued, as if reading from a script. "She wants closure," I said. "Tell her to find it in therapy. Don't talk about her like that." "Why not? You did worse." He stood up. "You're impossible. I learned from the best." The air between us thickened again. He looked like he wanted to shout, but something stopped him. Maybe age, maybe guilt, maybe realizing that yelling at me wouldn't fix anything anymore. He picked up his coat. "One day you'll understand," he said quietly. "I already do," I replied. At the door, he hesitated. "I wanted to fix this," he said. "Then you shouldn't have broken it," I said, and closed the door before he could respond. I didn't cry. Not that night, not the next day. But I couldn't stop replaying his face, the weariness, the regret that looked too much like self-pity. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. The other part remembered my mom's voice shaking when she'd told me, "Don't ever let anyone make you apologize for their sins." The following week, I got a call from my grandparents. My grandmother sounded hesitant. "Your father came by," she said. "He told us he tried to talk to you." "He did," I said flatly. Did it help? Not really, she sighed. He's never been good at facing himself, but you've always been brave. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Brave doesn't feel good, I said. It rarely does, she replied softly. Before hanging up, she said, you know, your mother forgave him years ago. That hit harder than I expected. Why? Because she wanted peace more than justice. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to let go of the anger that had kept me standing all these years. But that night, as I sat alone with the silence pressing around me, I began to wonder if peace was really forgiveness, or if it was just the exhaustion that comes after fighting too long. The next morning, a message came from an unknown number. You think you're innocent in all this. You're not. No name, no photo, but I didn't need one. It was her. The message sat on my screen for almost an hour before I replied. I don't know what stopped me. Fear, curiosity, maybe both. When I finally typed back, it wasn't anger that moved my fingers. It was a cold, detached calm. You're right, I'm not innocent. But I was 12, what's your excuse? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Then came her response. You think you know everything, but you don't. He loved your mother. He just couldn't live with her anymore. I stared at the words, something bitter rising in my chest. I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a sigh. He couldn't live with her, so he cheated. That's not love. That's cowardice. You don't know what marriage is like, she wrote. You're a child who thinks revenge fixes things. My hands tightened around the phone. A child. I'd spent half my life being told I was too young to understand pain, and the other half being told I was too old to keep holding it. You're right, I wrote. I was a child, and you were the adult who watched one burn just to feel warm. No reply, just silence. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later, I saw her again. Not by choice. I was leaving my office when I saw her waiting by the building's entrance, arms folded, sunglasses too large for the cloudy day. She looked the same, too polished for comfort, too brittle for warmth. Can we talk? She said. I wanted to keep walking, but something in me hesitated. Maybe curiosity, maybe the same reckless instinct that had made me pick up my dad's phone years ago. 5 minutes, I said. We walked to a nearby cafe, though neither of us ordered anything. She sat down first, crossing her legs, studying me like I was an exhibit she wasn't sure she liked. You've grown, she said finally. You look like your mother. Thank you, I said, my tone flat. Her lips tightened. That wasn't a compliment. I smiled. It was to me. For a moment, she looked genuinely thrown off. Then she leaned forward, voice low. You think I don't regret how things happened? You think I wanted any of this? I looked at her, really looked. The lines around her mouth were deeper now, her eyes sharper. There was no softness there, just the weariness of someone who'd built her life on top of someone else's ruins and was finally realizing the foundation wouldn't hold. You had choices, I said quietly. You both did, and you chose to destroy a family. She flinched. You don't understand. Your mother made him miserable. Then he should have left before he started sleeping with you. Her jaw tightened. You really are her daughter. I'll take that as a compliment too. We sat in silence for a while. People passed by outside, umbrellas bobbing through the drizzle. It was strange, how ordinary everything looked while we sat there dissecting the wreckage of a family. Finally, she said, do you know what you did to us? When you sent those messages, do you have any idea how humiliating it was? Yes, I said. That was the point. She shook her head, half in disbelief, half in anger. You're proud of that. No, I said softly, but I'm not sorry either. For the first time, she seemed to have no words. She just stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if searching for a crack in my calm. There wasn't one. You're cruel, she said at last. I learned from the best, I replied. She stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back with a sharp screech. You're just like your father, she said, venom in every word. That stopped me. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, I said quietly. He lies to feel powerful. I tell the truth to survive. She froze. For a moment the mask slipped. I saw something in her eyes, regret, maybe, or the faintest trace of shame. Then it was gone. You'll understand one day, she said, echoing my father's words almost perfectly. I doubt it, I replied. She left without another word. I watched her walk away, heels clicking on the wet pavement, her reflection rippling in puddles she didn't notice. For the first time, I didn't feel angry, just empty. That night, I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and steady. Hey, sweetheart, she said. Everything okay? I hesitated. Do you ever think I went too far? You know, with Dad and her. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear the faint hum of her kitchen light, the clinking of a mug. I think, she said finally, that you did what no one else had the courage to do. You told the truth, and the truth always feels like too much to people who built their lives on lies. I exhaled slowly. I saw her today. I'm guessing it didn't go well. She said I'm cruel. My mom gave a soft laugh. Then maybe she finally met herself. We both fell silent after that. I wanted to ask her if she ever forgave him, but I already knew the answer. Forgiveness wasn't something she gave easily. It was something she replaced with peace. Before we hung up, she said, "Don't let them make you question your worth. You were a child in a storm that adults created. You just threw lightning back." That night, I slept better than I had in months. But peace doesn't last long in families like mine. 2 weeks later, I got a call from my grandmother. Her voice was tight. "Your father been in an accident," she said. "He's fine, but maybe it's time you saw him." My heart dropped, though not from fear. It was something heavier, a mix of dread and duty. "Does she know you called me?" I asked. "She doesn't need to," my grandmother said. "This isn't about her, it's about you." I looked out the window, at the rain starting to fall again. It felt like the universe was setting up another storm. "I'll come," I said finally. And just like that, the past I thought I'd buried started clawing its way back to the surface. Hospitals have a way of shrinking people. Even the loud ones look quieter there, reduced by fluorescent light and the hum of machines that don't care who lied to whom. When I walked into his room, my father was propped up in bed with a brace around his wrist and a thin blanket over legs that seemed shorter than I remembered. He looked relieved to see me, which made me irritated on instinct. Why should my presence be a gift when it had been treated like a weapon for so long? "It wasn't serious," he said, as if that might rescue us both from the gravity of being in a place where serious things happen. Rear-ended at a light, he held up his bandaged wrist like proof that consequences could be this tidy. For a second, I saw the boy he must have been once, eager to show the teacher his scraped knee so someone could clap. "I'm glad you're okay," I said, and it was true. Truth is easy when it doesn't cost anything. He nodded at the chair. "Sit, if you want." The "if you want" landed between us like a small apology dressed in casual clothes. I sat, because it was easier than standing there auditioning new versions of myself. We did the hospital talk, nurses, insurance, how long he'd be out of work, until the air felt packed with enough boring to cushion the real thing. "She shouldn't have messaged you," he said abruptly, eyes on his water cup. "I didn't know until after." "I know," I said. It sounded like her. He let out a tired breath. "You too, you're similar." The laugh came out before I could stop it. "We are not similar." He studied me for a second, the way people read a menu when they can't afford to choose wrong. "I meant stubborn," he said, "and certain. It's not always a flaw. It can be a spine," I said. He nodded. "Yes, that." Silence again. A monitor beeped, insistent and indifferent. In the hallway, a cart squeaked past, the sound of someone else's job taking care of someone else's mess. I realized then that I hadn't come just to see whether his bones were intact. I had come to ask the thing that had burrowed so deep into my chest it had started to feel like an organ. "Did you ever regret it?" I asked. "Not getting caught doing it." He didn't answer at first. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the plastic cup the way he used to smooth worry into the corner of a bill. "At the time," he said slowly, "I told myself I was choosing happiness, and that adults are allowed to choose that." He looked up at me. "I didn't think about how much I was choosing it for you. For me." The words came out sharp enough to cut. "I mean in your direction," he corrected quickly. "Against your world. I told myself you adjust because kids adjust. I thought I could teach you to see it as complicated, and you'd call that mature." He sighed and sank a little further into the pillow. "When you sent those messages, I thought you'd ruin my life. Now I think you refuse to carry the lie I asked you to carry. I was angry because you did at 12 what I couldn't at 40. Tell the truth and accept what it costs." The apology was crooked, but it was an apology. I sat with it like a small, warm stone, surprised at how heavy it still felt. "She said you loved Mom," I said finally, "but you couldn't live with her." He shut his eyes for a beat, and when he opened them they were wet in the careful way men's eyes get when they don't want anyone to notice. "I loved your mother," he said, "just not the version of myself I became standing next to her disappointment. Instead of fixing that version, I ran. I told myself it was chemistry with someone new. It was just cowardice with better lighting." He didn't say "I'm sorry." He didn't have to. It was printed in the way his shoulders curled. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired, like someone who finally reached the top of a staircase and found another landing that looked exactly the same. "Why did you come to dinner like that?" I asked. "Why demand an apology in front of them?" He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Because shame is loud, and we were hopping to drown you out." He touched his wrist unconsciously, then glanced at the door. "Your grandmother told me to invite you here today," he added. "She said if I was brave enough to ask for the truth, I should be brave enough to hear it when it comes out of your mouth." My chest tightened. "What truth?" "That whatever bridge I want to build has to be paid for by me," he said. "Not by your forgiveness." He looked at me, all performance stripped. I want to know if there's a way back, not to before, to something that isn't a courtroom. I thought about the girl in the spare room with lasagna and 2 glowing screens, about the version of me that laughed in a woman's face because fear had calcified into something shinier. I thought about my mother, who had chosen peace without ceremony and refused to hang medals on it. I thought about being 16 at that restaurant and 20 now, and the way each birthday had felt like a verdict I was handing myself. I don't have a way back, I said. I only know how to go forward without denying where I came from. He swallowed. What does forward look like? Boundaries, I said. Contact that isn't a trap. No more group ambushes. No more asking me to apologize for telling the truth. And if she wants anything from me, she can want it quietly very far away. He nodded, almost grateful to have a list to memorize. Okay. And I need you to accept that I was a child who did a desperate thing, I added. Not because I'm proud of the method, but because I refuse to be ashamed of surviving it. He closed his eyes once, the way you do when a doctor pushes a splinter free. Okay, he said again, softer. I can do that. The nurse came in then with pain meds and a new IV bag. We moved aside to make room for the rituals of care. My father thanked her with a politeness that felt practiced and sincere. He looked older than when I'd walked in. Maybe I did too. On my way out, he said my name. I turned. If you ever want to know the whole story, he said carefully, I'll tell it to you, not to excuse anything, just to stop making you guess. He rubbed his wrist like it might be a lie detector. And if you don't, I'll never bring it up again. I nodded. Maybe sometime, I said. Right now I want to be good at my own life, not yours. In the elevator, I caught my face in the mirror and didn't recognize myself for a second. Not because I looked different, but because I was standing up straight. Outside, the afternoon had tipped into that quiet hour when the city softens its eyes. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message from an unknown number. You made him weak. He never stood up for us like this before. No name. Another text followed before I could block it. Meet me. One last time. If you don't, I'll come to your mother. I stopped walking. The threat wasn't loud, but it was precise. I felt the old heat rise, the reflex to swing back hard and public. I almost typed the address of a police station and told her to meet me there if she was brave. Then I remembered the 12-year-old who loved a fight because it meant she didn't have to feel anything softer. Instead, I called my grandparents. My grandfather picked up, voice already tuned to concern. We thought you might ring, he said. How is he? Contrite adjacent, I said. And someone's trying to bait me. He sighed. Come over, there's soup, and something in the drawer that belongs to you. What drawer? You'll see, he said, and hung up, which is how he says trust me without using words that make me itch. Their apartment smelled like ginger and old paper. My grandmother pulled me in, patted my cheek, and set a bowl in front of me like she was treating shock with broth. My grandfather sat at the table and watched me eat like good news. When the bowl was empty and my pulse had stopped staging a small rebellion, he nodded toward the sideboard. Top drawer. Inside, beneath a tangle of tea towels and a deck of cards too soft to shuffle, was a small tin box with a dented lid. My grandmother nodded for me to open it. Inside were things that didn't match but somehow went together. A Polaroid of my mother at 20, hair wild, eyes ferocious. A library card with my name printed in wobbly second-grade letters. A folded sheet of paper that turned out to be my 12-year-old handwriting in blue gel pen. Rules for grown-ups who want to talk to me. I stared at it, half embarrassed, half moved by the audacity of a child who'd written rules in a house where none applied to the right people. Your mother gave us that, my grandmother said softly. Said to keep it until you were ready to read it kindly. I scanned the list. No lying. No yelling. No pretending I didn't hear you when I did. If you break a rule, you have to fix it, not me. At the bottom, I'd drawn a box and written, sign here if you agree. No signatures. I laughed, a sad little sound that made my grandmother reach across and touch my wrist. We kept something else, my grandfather said, sliding an envelope toward me. It was thin, hospital white. Inside, a copy of a HR email dated the month everything exploded, formal, sterile, and devastating. We are aware of allegations. Please be advised that interpersonal matters impacting workplace conduct will be investigated. Attached was a second sheet, addressed to my father's wife from her then-employer. In light of recent disclosures and a conflict of interest policy, your position is terminated effective. I felt my stomach drop and settle. I had known I'd lit matches. I hadn't known which curtains burned. We didn't show you then, my grandfather said. You were a child. You were also right. Two things can be true and still wound each other. I started and stopped. Shame rose, old and new, even though I had worn righteousness like armor for years. I didn't want to ruin her. No, my grandmother said. You wanted the lying to stop. Adults ruin themselves. I folded the papers back into the envelope like they might break. The phone buzzed in my pocket again. Another message. Answer me or I'm on my way. I put the phone on the table face down and looked at my grandparents. What do I do? I asked. It wasn't a child's question. It was a woman asking how not to become her own worst instinct. My grandfather leaned back, steepled his fingers, and regarded me with the patience of a person who has survived enough to know endings are choices. You write new rules, he said, and this time you make sure the adults sign. How? You start with the police if you need to, he said simply. Or a lawyer, or us. You don't meet threats alone. You stop giving chaos a private audience. I breathed out and felt something in my body commit. I picked up my phone, blocked the number, saved the screenshots, and forwarded them, to my mother, to myself, to a folder named Proof. Then I texted my father, you need to handle your house. If she contacts me again, I go to the police. This is your only warning. A minute later, 3 dots appeared and disappeared. Finally, I will. I'm sorry. Another beat. Thank you for coming today. Soup? My grandmother asked again, already ladling. Yes, I said, surprised by the hunger in my voice. While we ate, my grandfather told me a story I'd never heard, about the time my mother, newly married and already unsure, had shown up at their door with a duffel bag and a list of rules she wanted to tape to the fridge. No lying, no yelling, no pretending I didn't hear you when I did. She lasted 2 days, he said, smiling fondly. Then she went back and tried to make a family out of Patience. She made you instead. The key moment didn't feel like a climax. It felt like a decision I'd been walking toward forever. I wiped my mouth, looked at both of them and said, okay, new rules. I took out a pen, turned my 12-year-old list over and began to write. No contact with her. All invitations in writing. No ambushes. If Dad wants to talk, we meet somewhere with good lighting and a bill at the end. At the bottom, I drew a box and wrote, sign here if you agree. The buzzer rang then, the apartment intercom sharp and insistent. My grandmother stood, startled. My grandfather pressed the talk button. A voice crackled through, high and tight with anger I recognized too well. Open the door. I know she's there. My grandfather's eyes met mine. He didn't ask. He just turned off the speaker, set his hand on the phone and said, calm as a doorframe, it seems your rules begin now. A buzzer cut through the kitchen like a blade. My grandfather pressed the intercom and her voice snapped back at us, high and brittle, demanding the door be opened because she knew I was there. He didn't argue. He simply released the button and set his palm on the landline like he was resting his hand on a sleeping animal that might need to wake up. He told me this was where my new rules began. I felt my heart try to sprint, and then I asked it to walk. I said I wasn't meeting anyone in a hallway. I said we were going to do this the adult way, with records and lights and someone whose job was to write things down. My grandmother was already pulling a small notepad from the drawer, the same one she used for grocery lists and prayers, and she wrote the time, the date, and buzzed 3 times, shouting in tidy letters that made me feel surprisingly safe. She buzzed again, longer. I could hear knuckles on the metal door downstairs, the kind of knocking that performs as much as it asks. In my pocket, my phone vibrated, more messages, all short, all heat. I didn't read them. My grandfather called the non-emergency line and explained there was an unwanted visitor who'd threatened to come to a different address if she didn't get what she wanted. His voice was polite and practiced. He told them there was no immediate danger, just a need for boundaries to be witnessed. He listened, thanked the dispatcher, and hung up. 5 minutes, he said. Maybe 10. I stood in the doorway between kitchen and hall and tried not to imagine being 12 and opening doors without asking who was on the other side. The buzzer went again. My grandfather pressed the button and told her calmly that the police were on their way and no one would be opening anything. I couldn't hear her words after that, just the change in tone. The way anger turns into something pleading when it realizes it won't be entertained. Then footsteps retreated down the stairwell, then silence, then the stairwell door banged again like a parting shot. My grandmother exhaled in a way that reminded me of rain stopping. When the officers arrived, they were exactly the kind you hope for. One older, one younger, both carrying that quiet competence that refuses to make a scene bigger than it needs to be. The older one asked what happened and I told him, not with drama but with dates. I said there had been messages threatening to come to my mother's address if I didn't meet privately, that she had come here instead, that I didn't want contact, and that my father needed to handle his household. I showed him the screen, the block, the forwarded backups. He nodded the way people nod when a story arranges itself into a shape they recognize. He asked if I wanted to file a formal report now or wait. He said they could do a courtesy call to tell her she'd be trespassing if she tried again. He said sometimes boundaries sound different when they come with a badge. I said yes to the call and yes to a simple report. It felt like documenting a weather event. The thunder, the hail, the fact that we all still had a roof. The officers left. 10 minutes later, my father texted that he was downstairs. My grandfather told me to choose whether I wanted to see him or let him leave. I said he could come up if he agreed to speak under my rules. He did. He looked like the hospital had followed him, gray around the edges, humbled by fluorescent light and painkillers. He said he'd told her to go home. He said he was sorry. Not as preface, not curled in a justification, just 2 words he held out like something breakable. I placed the sheet of paper on the table, the one where I had written the new rules in my own hand, flipped from the page 12-year-old me had once made. I told him we could have contact if it was scheduled, if it wasn't sprung on me at family events, if it didn't include her, if he would agree not to ask me to apologize for the truth, if he would intervene with his wife when she confused access with ownership. He read them the way you read an instruction manual for something you've already bent. He said he could sign it. He did. The copier in the building's management office made 2 more copies, and my grandfather tucked one into the tin box with the dented lid. It felt ceremonial in the least dramatic way, which is the kind of ceremony I trust. He said he wanted to talk about the dinner, to say he should have stopped it. He said he hadn't because he was afraid that protecting me would look like condemning his life now, and he wasn't sure he had the courage to stand in that mirror. He said he'd get better. I said I hoped so. He asked if he could hug me. I said not today. His face flickered with hurt and then settled into something like respect. He left without pushing. From the window, we watched him cross the street without looking at his phone once. Progress is sometimes as unglamorous as a man using a crosswalk properly. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like I'd finally stopped running before my lungs failed. I walked back to the table and the soup and the papers and let the quiet hold. My grandmother set a hand on my hair the way she used to when I was small and sicker than I admitted, and she said nothing because nothing needed to be said. For 2 days, the house of my life was steady. I went back to campus, to the tutoring lab, to the cheap coffee that always tasted faintly like burned almonds. I emailed my advisor the draft of the paper I'd been avoiding. I called my mother and told her the police had made a courtesy call and everything was uneventful after. She said she liked the word uneventful. She said she wished it had been the brand of our family. I laughed and told her maybe we could start selling it now. The universe doesn't like it when you think you've solved a pattern. The email came on a Wednesday at 4:03 p.m. Subject line neutral and homicidal. Meeting request. Student conduct HR. The body was polite. The university had received a concern regarding my use of personal information to harm the reputations of private individuals affiliated with the institution. And could I come in tomorrow to discuss? There was no accusation spelled out, just a few phrases that made my skin crawl. Hostile environment, retaliatory communication, policy review. Attached was a PDF of the relevant sections of the student handbook, the one we skim at orientation and then ignore because we are not the kind of people who cause problems. I read it twice. The first time, my stomach dropped so fast it left my throat raw. The second time, heat rose so cleanly I could have boiled water with it. I knew what this was. She hadn't gotten me to the park. She was trying to drag me into a different one with fluorescent lights and a table where people take notes with their heads tilted sympathetically. I heard her sentence in my head. You ruined our reputations. Translated now as you will pay for making me feel small, even if I have to invent a shape to pour the blame into. I took screenshots, forwarded the email to myself and to a folder called Keep Calm, and then I went down the hall to Dr. Patel's office because if I was going to spend a year learning to teach writing, I could also practice letting someone else read the draft of my crisis before I pressed send on a decision. She looked up as I hovered in the doorway. She has that kind of face that can register 3 moods at once and choose the right one. I told her I needed 10 minutes and a closed door. She made both happen without asking why. I handed her my phone. She read. She whistled softly and then said the sentence that stopped me from spiraling. She said we were going to treat this like any other writing problem. Identify the claim, produce the evidence, examine the audience, decide the purpose. I told her about the affair, the texts at 12, the dinner, the visit, the police call, the signed rules. I told her I had never messaged anyone at this university about any of it. I told her the only overlap was me and the rumor that my father's wife was now doing occasional contract work in a center on the other side of campus. Dr. Patel listened without making her face do that pity thing people think is kindness. She said I needed 2 things immediately: a contemporaneous memo to myself of the last month and counsel from Student Legal Services. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because people who haven't done anything wrong deserve advice just as much as people who have. She said she would come to the meeting if I wanted a witness. She said she would not let me sit in a room and be turned into a problem because I refused to be a secret. That night I sat at my desk and wrote the memo like a report from a frontline with good weather. Dates, times, what was said, who was present, copies attached of messages, the police report number, the signed sheet with my father's name in a hand that hadn't been forced. I did not editorialize. I did not add adjectives that would feel good to read and bad to defend. When I finished, I felt a steadiness that had nothing to do with righteousness. It felt like the truth wearing proper shoes. I slept badly, which is to say I slept like someone whose body carried a fire drill in her blood. In the morning, I wore the kind of clothes people call sensible when they mean non-threatening. I printed the memo twice and slid one copy into the same folder as my 12-year-old rules. My phone buzzed as I was leaving my father. He asked if everything was okay. I almost ignored it. Then I told him briefly that there was a meeting, that I was handling it, that if any of this had originated from his house, I expected him to cut off the gas. He said he hadn't known about any complaint and that he would deal with it. He didn't ask me to withdraw anything. He said he would text when it was done. For once, I believed a version of him that wasn't trying to sell me peace on credit. I met with Student Legal Services first. The attorney was young enough to still look excited about forms and old enough to have seen a dozen versions of people using process as punishment. She said the language in the email was standard preamble. She said my memo was the best gift I could have brought myself. She said the meeting would likely be a fact-finding with 2 administrators who had learned to speak in soft landing pads. She said my job was to answer the question asked, resist narrative traps, and ask who had filed the concern and on what basis. She said if the answer was, "We can't tell you," I should ask how I was supposed to respond to a rumor without touching it. In the corridor outside the conference room, Dr. Patel squeezed my shoulder and told me I had already done the hardest part the year I stopped carrying other people's lies for sport. We went in together. The administrators were as advertised, gentle, professional, rehearsed. They asked if I knew why I was there. I said I had received their email and was here to respond, but I would need to know the claim to respond responsibly. They said there had been an allegation that I had used knowledge of personal matters to threaten someone affiliated with a campus partner. I asked for the dates and the method. They said text messages. I handed over my screenshots, the blocks, the courtesy report, the non-response except for formal channels. I handed over the memo. I kept my hands flat on the table so they wouldn't ball into the fists my body still thinks are useful. They read. One of them asked if I had ever contacted that person's employer or any campus unit about her. I said no. I said the only time I used an employer to intervene, I was 12 and both phones were unlocked in a townhouse that didn't belong to me. The younger administrator almost smiled at that and then didn't, which I appreciated. They asked if I wished to provide any context about family history. I said I did not believe my family was relevant to my conduct as a graduate student, and that I would keep my personal history out of this room unless they insisted on opening that door. They didn't. They ended by telling me they would be closing the loop with the reporting party, and that I would receive a follow-up email indicating the matter had been resolved or whether more information was required. They thanked me for my professionalism, a word that, for the first time in my life, didn't feel like a way to flatten me. In the hallway, Dr. Patel said I did well. In the courtyard, my phone buzzed. A text from my father, handled. You won't hear from her again. I'm sorry it got this far. Another followed. I told her if she filed anything else about you, we were done. Maybe I should have said it years ago. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because some sentences need to sit for a while before you decide if they're promises or apologies disguised as weather. I walked home slowly. The late afternoon had that gentle, exhausted light that makes a city look like it's finally decided to be kind. I let myself imagine a version of the future where my father kept signing the rules without me having to hold the pen, where my mother's peace didn't have to be proof of her restraint, but could be something she lived like a comfortable sweater, where my 12-year-old list could stay in the drawer and not under my tongue. When I reached my building, there was a small package leaning against my door with no return address. Inside, a cheap picture frame, the kind you buy at a pharmacy when you need to make something look temporarily loved. The photo inside was a printout of a screenshot, my 12-year-old message to 2 work contacts, the one I had sent from their unlocked phones. Across the bottom, in red Sharpie, someone had written, "Actions have consequences." The same sentence I had thrown at my father like a mirror so many years ago. For a second, my breath left me in a way that felt like betrayal by my own lungs. Then I felt something familiar move through me. Not the thrill of a fight, not the righteousness I used to wear, but the steadiness that comes from knowing I'm not 12 anymore and my house has locks. I took a photo of the package, the frame, the handwriting. I emailed the images to the same folder. I texted my father a single line. This arrived at my door. One last time to handle it yourself before I file for a protective order. I put the frame in the trash and washed my hands as if it had been something spoiled. My phone buzzed while I dried them. A new email slid into view, this time from the administrators I had met. Matter closed, no policy violation found. I read it twice because sometimes good news feels like a typo. I forwarded it to Dr. Patel with a thank you that was too short for what she had given me. Then I called my mother, and when she answered, I didn't start with any of it. I asked what she was making for dinner. She said noodles. I told her I knew a cashier who could tell me which ones were worth the salt. Later, as I was about to sleep, my father called. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He said he was outside her place packing a suitcase into the trunk. He said it was over. He said he had told her the rules, and this time they had his signature on them, not mine. He said he didn't expect me to congratulate him. He asked if I was safe. I told him I was. He asked if I would meet him on Saturday at the diner my grandparents like, to sign a copy of the rules together, and to give me something he'd found at the bottom of a box in the garage. He said it belonged to the 12-year-old who had drawn a signature line for the adults and waited. I said I'd think about it. He said that was more than he deserved. When I hung up, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet as if it were giving me instructions. I thought about the diner, about a box, about a thing that had been waiting at the bottom of a garage that smelled like paint and old apologies. Then my phone buzzed one more time. A number I didn't recognize. No text this time. A voicemail. I didn't press play. I just watched the little red dot sit there like a dare and decided I would listen in the morning, not because I was afraid of what it contained, but because I finally had the power to make someone else wait. In the dark, with the rules signed and the matter closed and a package in the trash, I let myself believe that endings can be written without fireworks, just a final line that lands and then silence. I closed my eyes. The red dot blinked. Somewhere, a suitcase thumped into a trunk. Somewhere else, an old list and a new one shared a drawer. And in the morning, I would press play. I listened to the voicemail in the morning with the kettle boiling and the window cracked open. It wasn't her voice. It was a man's, unfamiliar, careful. He said his name and a company I recognized from the corner of a business card that used to live in my father's wallet. This is likely a misunderstanding, he said. We received an anonymous note asserting a conflict of interest involving you and a contractor. We're not taking action. I'm simply documenting contact. If you'd like to provide a statement, my line is open. He left a number, and the call ended with the soft click of someone trying not to wake a house. I stood there, fingers wrapped around the counter, and felt the shape of what she'd tried to do settle into something I could see from above. Not just a complaint on my campus, a scatter of seeds thrown into places she hoped would sprout into trouble. I poured the water. I didn't call him back. I emailed instead, concise as a lab report. I'm a graduate student with no connection to your contractor beyond a private family history. Attached are records of unwanted contact and a police courtesy report. Please consider this my only statement. I copied the folder with screenshots and dates, carbon copies of a life learned the hard way. Tell the truth, but dress it in documentation. At noon, I texted my father, diner at 2, 30 minutes. Bright booth, not a corner. He replied with a single thumbs up, a small mercy that he had learned not to add sentences that make me feel managed. The diner looked exactly as it always does. Chrome that wants to be a mirror, a pie carousel that turns even when no one is watching, laminated menus that apologize for inflation without using the word. He was there first, sitting in a booth where the light was unforgiving. I slid in opposite. He didn't reach for my hands or tilt his head the way people do when they want to warm you into softness. He just said, "Thank you for coming," and pushed an envelope across the table like it might bite him. Inside was a photocopy of our signed rules and a short note in his handwriting. "I will follow them even when you aren't watching." It was the kind of sentence that belongs on a wall calendar, earnest and embarrassing, but I felt it land in me anyway. He set a small cardboard box on the table next, the kind with a torn flap. "From the garage," he said. "I thought it was junk. Your grandmother told me it was." I lifted the lid. On top was a red ribbon, brittle with age, from a spelling bee I barely remembered winning. Beneath it, a child's drawing, 3 stick figures under a lopsided house, the son in the corner wearing a face that looked suspiciously like a lemon. The tallest figure had a guitar. The smallest had an enormous smile and a speech bubble that read, "I tell the truth." Under the drawing, a folded sheet of notebook paper with the edges fuzzed from being opened and closed too often. My handwriting, round and earnest, "Dad, here's how to be fair," followed by a list that made me want to laugh and cry at once. "Listen until I finish. Don't make jokes when I'm serious. If you break a rule, you have to fix it without saying it's my fault, even if you're tired." At the bottom, a rectangle labeled signature. It was blank. He watched me see it. He didn't try to explain. He just let the absence sit between us and count itself. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said finally. "I used to think that was the finish line. I'm asking to keep showing up exactly like this, signing what you put in front of me, leaving when you ask, not outsourcing my consequences to your patience." He hesitated. "If there's a day you want to know the rest, I'll tell you. Not the romance version. The parts that are ugly. I'll put my name under the truth you name." The waitress came and took our non-order with the efficiency of a woman who has heard 200 versions of "I'm trying" before closing. I asked for coffee. He asked for tea, which made me smile because my father hates tea unless someone else is pouring it and calling it medicine. We sat in the comfortable mechanical sound of a grill and the undramatic life of strangers. When the drinks came, he slid a pen across the table and, without prompting, signed the photocopy again, a second signature under the first, small and steady. "In case I forget," he said, "I'd like there to be more ink than excuses. I'm not moving the goalposts," I said. "I know," he replied. "The goal has always been, don't make your child carry your wreckage." We drank in silence for a few minutes. I could feel the old impulse to fill the space with words and watch him applaud my competence. I didn't. When the 30 minutes were up, I slid out of the booth. He did too. At the door he said, "One day I would like you to meet me somewhere that isn't neutral. Not now, just someday." I didn't make a promise. I nodded in a way that meant, "I heard you," and left without looking back. Not because I was trying to be cinematic, but because I wanted my body to learn that exits are allowed without explanations. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed, a reply to my email to the man with the careful voice. "Thank you," he wrote. "This is sufficient. File closed." 2 hours later, the university administrators sent their own coda. "We consider this matter resolved." Bureaucracy, when it behaves, is a blessing that looks like a boring email. For a week, nothing happened. No knocks, no anonymous frames, no calls disguised as emergencies. I taught my sections, graded my papers, stood in the grocery aisle weighing the price of vegetables against the weight of carrying noodles home. I slept. I forgot to check the red dot on my voicemail. On Friday night, I remembered and pressed play. Her voice was lower than I expected, the fight stripped out of it. "This is the last time," she said. "You win. Or maybe you just keep refusing to lose. I don't know the difference anymore." A breath. "He's leaving. I suppose you'll be happy. Part of me wants to tell you every rotten thing about your mother, your grandparents, your perfect little rules. But the truth is, the worst thing I can say is that you were right. You were 12 and you were right, and I couldn't make you small enough to stop being right." Another breath wet around the edges. "Don't call back, I won't either," the message ended. For a second I waited for the rest, rage, threat, a parting shot I could hold up like proof. It didn't come. I saved it. Not as a trophy, as a weather record. Saturday morning, I went to my mother. She had 3 mugs on the table when I arrived, and a plate of sliced fruit that looked like choreography. "Your grandmother's recipe," she said, handing me a bowl of congee, the exact temperature that makes your tongue believe in kindness. She would say eat before talking. "It confuses trouble." "Trouble is easily confused," I said, and she laughed the laugh she only gives me when the day doesn't need to be managed. We didn't talk about my father at first. We talked about the neighbor's new cat, about the leak in the bathroom ceiling that had finally stopped acting like a personality, about my student who wrote an entire essay on honesty and then plagiarized half of it from a parenting blog. When we did say his name, it wasn't a flare sent up into the sky. It was a noun in the middle of a sentence that also contained verbs about groceries and weekends and the way people can change and not change at the same time. "He came by last night," my mother said finally. "He didn't come in. He stayed on the step and said he was moving out. He said he had split from her and he didn't want me to laugh." "Did you?" I asked. "No," she said, smiling sadly. "I gave him a blanket in case his courage got cold on the way to the car." She turned her hands palm up on the table, a gesture I remember from the years when we counted coins together and pretended it was a game. "You know what the nicest part of all this is?" she asked. "I get to talk about him without defending myself from him. That's what peace is for me. Not noise, not punishment. The ability to put a man back in a sentence without letting him take the whole paragraph." I exhaled. "I think I'm there too," I said. "Good," she said. "Then we can be boring together." We were boring together for a while. Dishes, a short walk, a stop at the corner market where the owner calls us girls with the same affection every single time. In the afternoon, my grandfather called to say he'd found a frame worthy of my 12-year-old list and did I want to bring it by so he could hang it properly. I did. We stood in his hallway and watched him straighten it twice, then a third time, and then not again because perfection is rude after a point. "There," he said. "House rules." My grandmother kissed the top of my head and asked if I wanted to take the tin box home now. I said, "Not yet," and she nodded, as if she knew I wanted a place in the world where someone else kept a copy of me in case of fire. On my way out, my phone buzzed. A text from my father. Moving is done. Thank you for holding your line. It taught me where to put mine. I typed and deleted 3 responses, all of them witty, all of them petty, all of them defensive. Then I put the phone away and decided no reply can be a gift when the silence isn't punishment but boundary. That night, after gratting, after laundry, after the comfortable exhaustion that follows a day spent among people who aren't trying to turn me into a tool, I took the box he'd given me from the shelf and unfolded the drawing again. The stick figure version of me stood under a crooked sun, holding a speech bubble that still said, I tell the truth. I thought about the frame that had arrived at my door with actions have consequences scrawled across my 12-year-old text. I thought about the way that sentence had once been a weapon he used, then a mirror I held up, then a boomerang someone else threw that didn't return to their hand. The words hadn't changed. The ownership had. I wrote one more rule on a fresh sheet of paper and slid it into the box on top of the old lists. I don't accept consequences that are other people's camouflaged desires. It was ugly as a sentence and perfect as a policy. Sometime after midnight, I woke to rain. Not a storm, just the honest percussion of water doing its job. I lay there and let it count time for me. For the first time since I was 12, I didn't fall asleep planning a defense. I fell asleep planning a weekend. A movie with a friend, a call to my grandmother to ask if she needed me to label her spice jars again, a walk to the used bookstore where the owner keeps a stack of essays behind the counter because he says I read like a person who will write too, if someone keeps handing her the right kind of paper. In the morning, the sky had the washed-out look of a city that has been rinsed of its most performative dirt. I made coffee. I opened the window. I pressed play on the voicemail again, not because I needed to rehear her surrender, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the part where she said you were right without trying to take the sentence back. It was still there. Then I deleted it, not out of spite, to make room. My father and I will probably never be the kind of people who hug in diners. He will probably always be a man who keeps a pen in his pocket now, because he learned the hard way what happens when forms show up and he isn't ready. His wife, ex-wife, eventually, if the paperwork follows the drama, will probably tell a story about me in rooms I will never enter. My aunt will still think apologies are decor. My uncle will still send gossip like party favors after funerals. My mother will keep her peace not like a trophy, but like a habit. My grandparents will keep soup in the freezer and my list in the hall. And me? I will keep writing rules I can live by and letting them be boring. I will keep choosing bright booths over corners. I will keep my passport where I can reach it and my phone full of receipts I never show unless asked. I will keep believing that telling the truth doesn't make me cruel. It makes me the adult my 12-year-old self hoped would come and sit beside her in that too bright room and say, "You're not crazy, you're correct. And you don't have to carry this alone anymore." When I leave the apartment, I lock the door without checking it twice. On the way down the stairs, I pass my neighbor's kid sitting on the landing, cheeks wet, staring at a cracked toy like it betrayed him. Actions have consequences, he mutters, the phrase clearly borrowed from an adult. I stop, crouch, and hand him the missing wheel that rolled under the radiator. Sometimes consequences come with spare parts, I say. His face brightens like a small sun, and he runs back to his apartment without saying thank you because he's 5 and gratitude is a language he's still learning. On the sidewalk, the air is clean in that temporary way cities manage after rain. My phone buzzes once, an automated reminder for a dentist appointment, and then holds its peace. I turn the corner, walk toward the day, and feel the old tightness loosen its grip. The world doesn't tilt. It holds, and I do too.